Good afternoon, everyone. I call Committee of Supply Section A to order. We're meeting today to continue consideration of the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. I now recognize the Minister to move the vote.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move that vote number 35 resolved that a sum not exceeding $78,648,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, Ministry operations to 31st March 2022.
Thank you, Minister. I now recognize the member from Kamloops South Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. So with the time that we have this afternoon, I'm going to jump around to a few topics and see how much we can get done today in that time. I wanted to just start off by asking a specific question on behalf of my colleague from Peace River South. This actually just came in to him from a constituent today, so I'm going to read an email. It relates to the circuit breaker business relief grant and some frustration as to not having heard back yet and wanting to know, or having heard back, but given no answer as to why they're not, this business is not eligible. So I'm just going to read this into the record, and perhaps the minister could commit to looking into it. I'll give, I have the permission of the constituent to actually provide the application reference number, and if the minister could get back to the member from Peace River South as quickly as possible, that would be great. So the email says, hi Mike, in late March, the provincial government announced public health orders that demanded the closure of fitness businesses to better control the spread of the COVID virus. In early April, the government made available some financial assistance to those businesses, the Circuit Breaker Business Relief Grant, and we applied for Vera's Shaping, a fitness business that she has been running in Dawson Creek in excess of 20 years. 60 days after we submitted our complete application via email, we were notified today that we don't qualify. They did not say why we don't qualify, but we provided all of the information they required and we met their criteria. First, it is unbelievable that it should take 60 days to process a simple application. It is unacceptable to respond by saying you don't qualify without referring to their criteria that was not met. Second, there is no way of speaking with anyone from the program to question their decision. End quote. Or actually, one final sentence. Is there anything you can do to find out more about this? End quotes. And again, this is an email sent from Miles Mowat of Vera's Shaping to the member from Peace River South. The application reference number is 21009273. So perhaps I know that the minister's staff are listening in, so if they have an answer that they can relay, we can do that today and I can get it to the member, or we can just ask that someone from the program reach out to this particular business and at least let them know why they have been deemed ineligible for funding in this program.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank you to the member, Honourable Member, for raising that, and to, of course, the Honourable Member from Peace River South. Staff heard the number, and they will reach out to that business to give them more information.
Member.
Okay, great. Thank you to the Minister for that. If you could make sure that the member for Peace River South is copied on that correspondence. That would enable him to close the loop with his constituents, so I appreciate that. Next up, I just wanted to ask a couple questions about the the mass timber implementation, which is a feature of the minister's mandate letter and his ministry service plan and so forth. And I know that he has done a fair bit of work on this file even prior to becoming a member of cabinet. The one piece that I wanted to get some clarification on is this. In the government's recently released forestry intentions paper, Modernizing Forest Policy in British Columbia, it makes a reference in this intentions paper to the, and I quote, value-added and secondary manufacturing have not grown significantly, end quote. So I take from that in part that the mass timber program perhaps is not moving along at the clip that government perhaps envisioned or had wanted to see to this point. And so I'd like to ask a couple questions here, again, to better understand the current status of this program. So the first question is, what is the current market share of mass timber in building construction in British Columbia? So what's the current market share? And what are the targets that the ministry that the minister is overseeing for mass timber construction in building here in British Columbia? What are the targets that the minister is actually working towards? Is there a 1-year target, a 3-year target, a 5-year target? What targets are in place, and what is the baseline that we are at with respect to mass timber construction here in British Columbia today?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I think that the remark or the, I guess the assumption that was being made around just mass timber not moving at the speed we like in the last few years, I think it's more over the last 2 decades. I mean, if we look at when Gordon Campbell was Premier and we brought in Brock Commons, it was the first of its kind in the North America or in the world, and there was a hope that after that it would move at a much faster pace. And so I think the reference was more to, over the last 20 years where we've really were hoping for it to move faster and the pace that it's moved at since Brock Commons. That being said, the office, the Mass Timber Implementation Office, which is within our ministry, it's a new office. The work on setting baselines is happening right now. And so I can't give the member specific, but if he looks at the service plan, it says specifically in there that the first task of the office in the first year is to establish the baseline. And the member, honourable member, was asking about just value added overall. We just recently funded a value added supply chain resiliency through the supply chain resiliency program, $400,000 to work with Kofi on a value added study that will also look at opportunities that we have from our forest sector.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. I'm certainly well aware to the Minister's answer there that the performance measure in the service plan around market share is an item that is work that is underway. I would have just assumed that there was a starting point, a baseline that was or a range of baselines that the ministry would be working with as it's building out its targets moving forward. So I take that is not the case. The minister can correct me if I'm wrong, but at the present time there is no baseline for what percentage of building construction in or market share that mass timber represents in terms of building construction in British Columbia, and if there's no baseline, there would obviously be no targets moving out. Is that correct? Just so I'm absolutely clear.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. The work, as I've highlighted in the service plan, to build the baselines is something that's in the service plan. I think the member may find interesting that we estimate at this time that we'll need 15 times the amount of buildings that we're right now seeing come through as mass timber in order to meet the capacity of what we have right now. And I think what the reason why it's challenging is no jurisdiction has put baseline metrics like this in place, because it's not quite as simple as in what's mass timber, what's not, and so that's what the complexity is of having the baseline. But that the work is happening right now. In the last decade, we had 285 buildings with some form of mass timber built into it. And so one of our goals is to move this from niche to mainstream, this type of construction. And I think it's important to highlight that, of course, the mass timber component is an important component, but it's not the only component that's important. There's also the services that come with it. For example, architects, engineers, all those specialty skills that we have in British Columbia are also going to see the benefits of us moving mass timber along. Not only are we able to use more of our forest products here to build in a sustainable way and address climate change along with our construction, but also we are able to see opportunities to export the services we produce here to other jurisdictions. And so far we've had great interest. We have 21 local governments that have stepped forward to want to play an important role in the movement of mass timber here in British Columbia.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. We'll be paying close attention as to the baseline that's developed and that work that the minister says is underway in the ministry to understand what the growth potential that the government's expecting for mass timber in building construction really is. Hard to develop targets if you don't have a baseline. I would just, as a final comment, I would suggest that it's a bit odd that 4 years into this government's tenure, having now found themselves into a second term in government, that the baseline work on the mass timber program is in development. It would seem to me that considering how much the Premier and the Minister and others in government have talked about this much vaunted mass timber program under their government, it's a bit odd that work in developing baselines and targets seems only to have begun in recent months. So we'll be paying close attention to that moving forward. What I wanted to move to now is I want to talk about trade offices. And in particular, trade office closures, and this goes back to I believe in January of 2020, the government of British Columbia announced that it was closing all of British Columbia's trade offices across Asia, and the minister can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were 13 offices. I believe that there were about 70 people working in those British Columbia trade offices across Asia. And the government made the decision in January of 2020, it might have even been on New Year's Eve, or the decision was made prior to this, but it was announced on New Year's Eve of 2020 to close these offices. Now, the minister will, if I don't say anything else, anything more on this, the minister will come back and say, well, fine, that might be true, but we're co-locating and so forth. Co-locating with the federal government. My understanding is that yes, there is co-location that it has taken place. I believe British Columbia has 4 individuals in Guangzhou, China, in a co-located model with the federal government. There's one person representing British Columbia in the co-located office in Beijing, and there may be one individual representing British Columbia in a co-located model in Shanghai. I'd be curious to know if there are any co-located offices that British Columbia is participating in other jurisdictions. We've been trying to pin down if India has any individuals representing British Columbia in a co-located model there. But backing up, I guess recognizing the significant economic impact that's been quantified many times in many different independent reports as to the value of British Columbia having its own voice, its own face, its own presence across the Asia Pacific, and recognizing that British Columbia is Canada's gateway to the Asia Pacific. I guess the first question would be, why did the government make the decision to close all of British Columbia's trade offices across the Asia Pacific, albeit moving a handful of individuals? We went from 70 people down to less than 10. The minister can correct me on the exact numbers. Why was that decision made? And part of the backdrop to this question as well is my understanding that that British Columbia continues to have a trade office in London, England, and we continue to have a trade office in San Francisco. So it wasn't like a decision was made to just throw the entire trade office model out the window. It was retained in the United States and in Europe or in England. But it was not retained in the Asia Pacific. So the question to the minister would be, why was this decision made? What's the basis upon which the decision was made to close all of these trade offices in British Columbia, which for years had done such great work at building relationships and really connecting British Columbia entrepreneurs and businesses with interests in Asia, which is about economic development and economic opportunity here. Why were these offices closed? Why were similar offices kept open in areas of the world outside of Asia? And what kind of lead time was actually given to these offices in Asia as to the impending closure of their offices?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. The member is correct if his belief is that we shifted our offices to a co-location model. I know that this was canvassed heavily in last year's estimates. Some light reading I was able to do on a weekend, and I know the Minister for Emily went through this in extensive detail at that time. All the offices that were shifted were given 3 months notice accordance to the contracts that were in place, and ultimately the co-location model is similar to other provinces: Alberta, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Quebec. And it allows us to both maximize the efficiency, but also leverage the Canadian brand. And obviously, also gives us a chance to maintain the BC brand, but leverage the Canadian brand. So it's been good. And obviously, with the pandemic, there's some challenges with the trade and having people. Having the ability to be able to go and visit our new offices, but certainly my hope is that once it's safe to do so, to be able to do that.
Member.
Can the minister provide, again, just for absolute accuracy here, which offices in Asia were BC trade offices were closed and moved to a co-located model? What the total number of employees was in each of those offices prior to the closure, how many employees now exist in the co-located model in Asia, and which specific locations across Asia do we have Canadian or do we have individuals employed by the province of British Columbia working within a co-located model representing the interests of British Columbians?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And I think it's important to highlight again for the member that the offices weren't closed. The folks we had there were contractors, and we've shifted to a co-location model. And I'll offer to the member if you would like a detailed briefing with the team. We can make the staff available for him if you would like to go through this in greater detail. The member asked about, I guess, where the teams are and how many we have. In Japan, we have 3 full-time, 3 FTEs, 1 coming. South Korea, we have 3 FTEs, 3 more are coming. China, we have 6 FTEs. Philippines, we have 2 FTEs. Indonesia, we have 1 and another one that's coming online soon. Singapore, we have 2 FTEs, another one coming online, and India is in the midst of the transition, and obviously with the pandemic and the challenges that India is facing, there's a bit of a delay there, but we are expecting 6 to 8 FTEs in that market, and of course, as I've highlighted, this model gives us the opportunity to ensure that we have efficiencies in the system, some savings, and of course, most importantly, to be able to leverage our Canadian brand and enhance our BC brand.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I likely will take the minister up on a briefing at some point about this sort of the entire file related to trade in Asia Pacific in particular. I am curious as to how things are structured today in contrast to how they were structured, and again, to better understand the rationale for moving in the direction that the province has moved. I do want to ask this, though. I think we all know that every jurisdiction has very different local laws, and some are much more stringent than others. In Indonesia, the Philippines, as examples, have got a much more stringent laws around contractors and employment severance and those kinds of issues than other jurisdictions. So my question to the minister is quite straightforward. Was the closure of the BC trade offices done in accordance with local law, i.e. in the Philippines, it was done in accordance to the Philippine law, or was it done in accordance with British Columbia law?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The contracts were terminated consistent with the terms of the contract.
Member.
Okay, well, now my spidey sense is up a bit. I'll ask again, in recognizing that that each country, each jurisdiction has its own unique set of laws, local laws and standards related to employment and office leases and other obligations that are incurred when you do business in their countries. Was the closure of these offices done in accordance with those local host country laws, or done as if those or were the contracts treated as if they were in British Columbia? And I guess as a secondary question, were some jurisdictions governed by the laws of British Columbia and Canada because that's the way the contracts were written, and a different approach was employed in other jurisdictions where local laws took priority? Perhaps the minister could clarify this. Again, were these closures and the parting of ways of the contractors, as the minister referenced contractors, was the parting of ways of these people that staffed these offices, was it done in accordance with local host laws? Were the contracts written to reflect local host laws, or were they written to reflect the laws of British Columbia and Canada?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Masks cause some complexities of getting prepared to answer, but we really appreciate, I know the Honourable Member from across the way and I, your flexibility in allowing us to be lenient with the masks when we have to answer. We haven't had that in all our debates, so we appreciate that. So just to clarify and just to be clear in my previous answer, we had contracts for service. The contracts were terminated consistent with the terms of the contract, and in many cases, the contracts had just merely expired.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Well, my understanding is that many people that were charged with the responsibility for running these BC trade offices were given very last-minute notice of the fact that these offices were being closed and that their positions were being eliminated. In many cases, my understanding is that in many cases there are offices and individuals who ran those offices in different locations across Asia that have been left hanging with lease obligations and other costs that may represent a liability for the province of British Columbia. So my question to the minister would be this: is he aware of any outstanding legal actions or legal proceedings or the like that in any way relate to the closure of these trade offices, BC trade offices across Asia?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And yes, we are aware of legal proceedings. These matters are before the court, and I can't comment on them any further.
Member.
Not looking for the minister to comment on any specific legal action or proceeding that he has confirmed may or are underway in some of these jurisdictions related to the closure of British Columbia's trade offices, a decision that his government made. But let me ask this question. Is the minister and government concerned about damage to British Columbia's reputation as a result of this decision to close offices? As the minister would know well, it takes a heck of a lot of time and effort and showing up to build those relationships. The relationships can be compromised very, very quickly through decisions that are perceived in host countries to be hasty and not in the best interest of the relationship. Furthermore, if a jurisdiction like British Columbia makes decisions that leave people hanging, do not fulfill obligations, legal obligations, and so forth, obviously that would not be well received by these host countries. So, in light of the fact that the minister has confirmed that there are legal proceedings and legal lawsuits potentially underway in a number of these jurisdictions, in not commenting on that specifically, but rather on British Columbia's reputation. Is the minister at all concerned that this decision to close offices so abruptly and in leaving many people hanging potentially, that this decision may have given British Columbia a black eye in terms of our presence and our reputation in the Asia Pacific?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and Hansard can just probably take last year's estimates and put them back to this year's estimates because they're the same questions and very similar answers, which is the offices weren't closed. We shifted to a co-location model. And the teams on the ground tell us that they're being well received as markets start to open up. I think the member will be happy to hear that BC continues to outperform the rest of the country when it comes to our exports. Wood products from 19 to 20 were up 6.6%. Agriculture, food and fish, and agriculture and food other than fish, 9.4% up. Metallic mineral products 5.8% up. So we continue to see positive results. China, again, was number 2 for BC exports in 2020 with 5.7 billion, even within a pandemic. That's quite remarkable. So we continue to get positive feedback from our teams on the ground.
Member.
Thank you very much, Chair. Offices were closed. I mean, British Columbia had its own trade offices all across the Asia Pacific, up until this government decided to move from a model where British Columbia had its own standalone offices with staff in those offices, building direct relationships to partners in host countries across Asia, to a model that is very different, a co-location model. And we can debate the merits and the pros and cons of each model and the merits of the move and all the rest of it. And we will do that. But in the here and now, it is not an accurate statement for the minister to continue to say that offices weren't closed. Offices were closed. And in fact, the minister has just confirmed on the record that there are legal proceedings, legal actions that are underway in some jurisdictions related to the closure of British Columbia's trade offices. So you can't have it both ways. Now, this is will be my final question of the estimates for this budget, and recognizing the time and other ministries that are stacked up behind us, we'll have to make way for those other ministries. But I'm going to list off a series of questions that I will have on the record that I would hope that the minister would commit to getting back to me on, and if he could say at the end of my question, when I list these questions, if he could just confirm that he will get back to me with responses in writing, I will very much appreciate that. So number one, within which jurisdictions are legal proceedings underway? It's not asking about the specifics of legal proceedings, but in which jurisdictions in Asia where British Columbia closed trade offices, in which jurisdictions are legal actions or proceedings underway? Number two, does the minister believe that British Columbia's reputation has been damaged as a result of these trade office closures and the resulting legal proceedings related to them? Number three, what was the total closure cost for all of British Columbia's trade offices? Number four, what about what is the closure cost for each individual office? Next question, were there any offices that did not co-locate all their staff in Asia, or were they all closed and moved to a co-location model? Next question, what are the per office savings, or what are the savings that are being realized to the taxpayers of British Columbia on a per jurisdictional location basis in having moved from British Columbia having its own offices to moving to this co-location model? Next question. What were the staffing levels in British Columbia's trade offices prior to them being closed, and what are the staffing levels in the co-location model, or the staffing again that obviously represents British Columbia? Next question. Are new staff required to be paid federal public service wages in the co-location model, and if so, how are there any cost savings there, or could the minister detail what the cost savings would look like if that indeed is the case? Next question, can the minister explain what the impacts have been to the existing business relationships that had been established under the old system, the system where British Columbia had its own trade offices? Next question, are key industries identified for focus under the new co-location model? And if yes, what are they? And if the minister could list that by jurisdiction. Next question, trade offices were, when British Columbia had its own trade offices, they were required to report out on a regular basis with respect to their meetings and investments achieved. Could the minister detail how many investments have been realized through the co-location model that has been put in place? And last but not least, how many investor meetings and what dollar value of opportunity has been created as a result of this new co-location model? So those are my final questions of this estimates process. And again, on this specific piece that we've been canvassing here this afternoon, I would ask the minister to please confirm that he is prepared to provide responses to those questions I just read in the record to me in writing at his earliest opportunity. And then beyond that, I will take this as a final opportunity, as my final opportunity to thank Deputy Minister Bobby Plecas and the entire team inside the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation for the exceptional work that they do each and every day of the week on behalf of British Columbians, and appreciate the interaction that the minister and I have had over what I think is about 16 or 17 hours of time. But I think all valid, important questions that the people of British Columbia have a right to hear us ask and hear us answer. So with that, I'll cede the floor to the minister, and thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and yes, we will get the information that the member requested in writing, and again, if he would like to have time with the team to a one-on-one, I think he indicated that he's interested, and we'll find a time for that to happen also. And thank the honourable member for the enjoyable 17 hours of exchange that we've had. You know, certainly there will not be many articles written about the respectful tone that we've had between ourselves, but I have appreciated the exchange. I too want to thank the amazing team that I've got here in the ministry. Of course, my Deputy Minister, Bobby Plecas, who's here, but the entire team that's sitting in a very, very large room somewhere in the building to be able to provide supports. We are so incredibly fortunate to have these amazing people that serve the people of British Columbia. You know, I think normal times the public might not fully appreciate the services that people of government provide, but this pandemic has shown to people how critically important that the work they do is to everybody's lives, and they've done it in an exemplary way through under very difficult situations of the pandemic. And so I'm so grateful for the work they've done. I appreciate the work that they do for the province, and again, thank the member for this lovely 17 hours. And with that, this year.
It's okay. It's okay.
Oh, I've moved already. Okay.
Thank you, Minister, and all members. Seeing no further questions, I will now call the vote. Those participating remotely, please prepare your voting cards. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Motion carried. Thank you, members. And I thank you all, and the committee will now take a 10-minute recess while we prepare for the Ministry of Health. I call Committee of Supply Section A back to order. We're meeting today to consider the budget estimates of the Ministry of Health. I now recognize the Minister to move the vote.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 32, resolve that a sum not exceeding $23,725,698,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Health, Ministry operations to 31st March 2022.
And Minister, do you have any opening remarks?
No opening remarks. I want to get forward to the exchange except to welcome Member for Kelowna Mission, to congratulate her for all her work as health critic. The member will know that I was health critic for a very long period of time. I might have been the longest serving health critic in the Legislative Assembly, and she'll also know I only got out of the job when I was elected Leader of the Opposition. I'm not making any suggestions to the member right now. I know that job is open right now in the long term, but I'm going to make no suggestions. That's not by way of comment. It's just what happened. And just to say I look forward to the debate. I really appreciate the diligence and work of the member and look forward to having a good exchange over the next few days.
I now recognize the member from Kelowna Mission.
Thank you so much, Chair. Well, I did watch the Minister over the last estimates with my colleague and Leader of the Official Opposition, and so I did prepare just a couple of comments, if that's all right. If I could just take a couple of minutes. First and foremost, just to thank you. As we can all appreciate, this is my very first estimates, so I hope that any foibles will quickly be covered. And also, we have 17 hours together, so hopefully within those 17 hours, we'll definitely start to make some headway. But really, I want to thank you in advance for just the grace extended during these estimates. But I really look forward to reestablishing benchmarks over the course of this next few days, as we have been through truly a remarkable year. I did want to take this opportunity, especially because it's the first time to ever see the Minister in person since actually taking this role, to thank you. I wanted to thank you for your service, for your leadership, and really for the successes of how you've been able to make it through this pandemic. So I did want to take that opportunity, and I also know that no leader is a leader on their own, and so thank you very much to the Deputy Minister as well as the rest of your team, because I know that it's never been more important to have steady hands at the helm, and I do appreciate that leadership. And what a year it's been. Quite remarkable, actually. And while we do want to celebrate all that has been accomplished, this is our opportunity to really look at the toll that it's taken and help to move forward and through this next year. The toll has been absolutely unmeasured. I don't know how we'll ever be able to see what the impact was truly on society. You know, the stress of the unknown, the loss of society as we know it, loss of celebration, but most importantly, the loss of life. All of us have stories of the affect of this pandemic on us, but none more than our frontline workers. And they've really taken the brunt of the worst that COVID has to offer, and then coupled it with all of the same stresses that we all experience as a society. Additionally, the health concerns that are outside of the pandemic didn't stop. And so I appreciate the Minister and the Deputy Minister's efforts on really making sure that those efforts were moving forward at the same time. You know, we needed those frontline workers to still be there to deliver our babies, as well as conduct radiation, chemo, be there for testing, emergency room visits, and then just deal with our health woes. So my hope is that through these estimates, we're able to reestablish some benchmarking. But even more so, I hope that we can reestablish some hope of how things can be different, of how we're going to move forward, and of how we're going to move forward together. So thank you very much for that. The good news is that we get to do that together. The bad news is that you have to deal with me for the next 17 hours. But hopefully I'll do my best to make it as easy as possible. Thank you so much, Ms. Chair.
Minister?
Well, thank you, and it's now, of course, to the member to start our discussion, our questions. I very much appreciate her comments. I know on behalf of the team of people at the Ministry of Health I'm going to get used to this glasses on, mask off thing eventually. But now the glasses are off, and I'm doing okay. Just she'll know that we have a team of people, including Dr. Henry is up in my office and others who are going to assist us in providing detailed answers, because part of the process here is to get detailed questions and to be in a position to respond. There are going to be occasions when we'll need to seek more information. What I try and do is to keep the rhythm of the thing going. If we don't have an answer right away, to get it, and then allow us to continue with the rhythm of the debate. I think the member talks about benchmarks, and I think they're important. Budgetary benchmarks. We've been through, of course, an extraordinary year, and so I'd say that with this caveat that last year, in terms of health, we accessed contingency spending, and this is unaudited. You'll get the audited statements, of course, at the time. Members will get audited statements at the time of the public accounts, but in the area of $1.9 billion to contingencies. And there's more contingency access this year because we're still in the pandemic. In an ordinary year, we're not going to be setting benchmarks for testing. In an ordinary year, we're still in the pandemic, and we're still, as the member will know, not but a few weeks ago were we significantly in the midst of the third wave of that pandemic. So that presents some challenges. Some of the benchmarking and how we go forward from this will happen and will be part subject of our debate in Budget 2022, inevitably. But of course, we'll do our best to ask questions, and I'll just leave it to the honourable member. Answer questions, and I'll leave it to the honourable member.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So never before has the health and wellness of our society been more focused or more necessary. A fully choreographed and almost unified global effort has ensued. And this really seemed true when the NDP government has come to power in this last election in 2020. I'll quote from the mandate letters for all the ministers, quote, British Columbians expect their elected representatives to work together to advance the broader public good despite their partisan perspectives. That means seeking out, fostering, and championing good ideas regardless of their origin, end quote. And that would seem to have provided the skeleton for how health should be handled. Would the minister agree?
Minister.
Thank you. It's not a question of agreeing. It's how I think that I've engaged in the job of Minister of Health since I became Minister of Health in 2017, working with all members of the House, both on local issues, because I have enormous respect. I am an MLA, but enormous respect for the views of MLAs. And when they say there's a problem in Fernie or in Cranbrook or in Dawson Creek or in Cowichan, then I take that into account, and we work hard together to resolve individual problems, both what we call casework problems, but also problems in communities. In terms of capital projects in communities, I've taken that view as well. The member will know that most of the early capital projects that I announced as Minister of Health were in opposition communities, and I worked very significantly with opposition members in promoting those projects and developing a sense of community support, which is important outside of Metro Vancouver. The member will know, as the member will know, local taxpayers pay 40% of those costs, and inside Metro Vancouver, there's a significant, there is everywhere, but especially inside Metro Vancouver, a significant role of foundations. On the issue of health professional colleges, we came together, the former critic, myself, and the current critic for the Green Party, the leader of the Green Party, came together to do a unanimous report, which I think is going to be transformative and lead to a transformative reform of health professional colleges that we're going to see in the fall. I don't think such a committee had ever been formed before, and under the legislature. It wasn't formed when I was health critic. That's not a criticism of the people who were health ministers. Mr. Abbott and Mr. Falcon at that time were obviously excellent MLAs, but we hadn't done that before. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I think there's been an unprecedented degree of cooperation. In March of 2020, we moved to improve access to seniors to senior services in community, because we saw, in addition to all the issues in long-term care, which were significant, the need to enhance services in community as people were isolated in a time of both strict public health measures, but also in terms of the public, a significant amount of fear around COVID-19 in its first wave. And so I formed a committee working with the seniors representative staff of the Ministry of Health that involved the now leader of the opposition, the former member for Richmond, Mr. Yap, the member for Burnaby North, the member for Cowichan, and other members of the committee, and the member and most importantly, the person who was my parliamentary secretary for seniors at the time, who was the chair of our session today. And they worked together in, I think, an unprecedented way that hadn't been done before, without direction from me, but working together to say, well, here, I found the resources, if you will, in the budget and gave a plan forward, and they worked together to see that that money was distributed. And if we were going to ask questions or debate that plan, we would bring, I think, that group of people together. And then, of course, during the pandemic, we've had, I think, and I mentioned this in my exchanges with the leader of the opposition on last week on Tuesday and Wednesday, we've had, I think, unprecedented and consistent in advance cabinet-level briefings of the opposition that haven't been directed by me, because they occurred at opposition caucus meetings, and there is an important confidentiality in those caucuses. So I didn't take part in them, but consistently the provincial health officer and the deputy minister of health and others, as appropriate, gave those briefings, and there was a free and frank exchange of views between the provincial health officer and members of the opposition caucus at the time. Those are just examples of my approach. I think it's very important. We get elected here for 4 years, and I've gone through what the current opposition has been through as a member of the legislature, of having worked hard and wanted to win an election and then not won an election. And I consider the role of all members of the legislature important. And so we're here together for 4 years, and I think we should make progress together. So that's the example. It's not my words, but I hope my actions, which have indicated the approach I take to working with everybody in the legislature to make public health care better.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I really do appreciate what the minister gave examples of, and just the speaking of that collaborative spirit, because I do agree. And I also would agree that there was some amazing outcomes from that collaborative spirit and those examples of collaboration. But I do want to draw the minister's attention to the last time that the Standing Committee on Health actually met was in 2017. So while there was a different system that then ensued over the course of the next 3.5 years, since this government has taken the helm in 2020, we haven't had that. I would agree also that there were briefing calls and there was definitely exchange of information, but it certainly seemed to be more one-sided or one-directional in terms of updating us and giving us information than really meaningful dialogue where we were a participant or an active participant. And really, if we look past COVID and the trauma that this has caused over the last year, we can really see that there are so many pressing health issues and so much at stake. So my question through the chair to the minister is this: will the minister ask for the Standing Committee on Health to be called and instructed to meet on some of the most pressing issues?
Minister.
Honourable Speaker, the member will know, I think, first of all, how unusual the Parliament was between 2017 and 2020. That was a Parliament where essentially we had a number of regular committees in operation. The Select Standing Committee on Public Accounts, there was a number of, I think, excellent decisions made by that Parliament with respect to permanent officers of the legislature, unanimous decisions that were made, and a number of other committee operations that existed. Although I would say that there were specific circumstances in that time between 2017 and 2020, the fact that the Parliament itself was a minority Parliament, that provided some limitations to that in terms of membership on committees. As the member will know, in general, cabinet ministers are not part of legislative committees. That's sort of the modern tradition of that, and so that created issues. I would say that in my 5 years as opposition critic for health, the committee was never called. I never attended a select standing committee on health as in that time, from May 2006 through to 2011. That was the approach of the government at that time, and it tended to be the approach of governments to make decisions to deal with a certain number of issues in each period that go to select standing committee and are dealt with by select standing committees. But if the member has suggestions as particular topics in that approach, I'd be happy to pass that on to the Premier and have a discussion of whether that is the right vehicle to address those issues. But I think it's fair to say that there's there has historically been less utilization of committees than perhaps members would like of the legislature. So I think there are opportunities to do that, and there are issues that are attuned to that. In addition, though, but where I would disagree with the member is the nature of the communications that existed during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it greatly underestimates the role that she herself plays, that other members of the opposition play in contributing and have contributed to the development of our approach. Certainly that was true, that has been true in the early part of the pandemic. I mentioned the Leader of the Opposition, the member for Kelowna Lake Country, the member for Cowichan, but other members of the House as well. And I think that we find other ways, and part of the reason we decided to reform health professional colleges in the way that we did was some of the challenges of the legislative committee process. So we just went past that and we decided we were going to agree unanimously in sharing the decisions. And I think the report that came out of it and the legislation that came out of it will as much reflect the views of the member for Cowichan and the member for Kelowna Lake Country as I do myself, as should both the credit and sometimes, when you make difficult decisions, the responsibility, right, for that, which is fair enough. And so that's been my approach and will continue to be, and I'm happy to take suggestions from the member with respect to select standing committees, understanding to some degree their limitation, but also the possibility that of their usefulness. As I say, previous governments haven't used them as much as perhaps they could have been used, so we're always open to suggestions.
Member.
Thank you. So I would agree with the minister that it was an unusual with the minority government and the coalition, and there was some really great work done. And the report, as the minister noted, is a great example of that collaborative work. And it does provide ownership from all sides of the House then in terms of a move forward. And I would also agree that I don't think that standing committees have all been effective necessarily throughout time. But I think that if we look back historically, there was an evolution of the standing committee, and there was a call to more actually by the other side of the House when we were in government for those opportunities. So I would ask again, and I'll rephrase the question for the minister this way: if it's not the standing committee, what is the committee? What is the format that it will be for us to actually have meaningful dialogue on issues such as mental health or healthcare innovation, etc.?
Minister.
Honourable Speaker, there is, I think, enormous opportunity for a mutual approach. I think that's what, as I was saying to the member, I think when I started, I say it a little bit ruefully, that I'm unusually experienced in the life of an opposition MLA. And I served in that capacity in a number of ways. And in that period, it should be said, and the member's right, there's always a debate about when and where we should use select standing committees. Other than 1 year on the Public Accounts Committee. None of the committees I was assigned to by the Committee of Selection ever sat in my 12 years on the opposition benches. So I think there's ways for the House leaders to come together and talk about how we can better use committees, and I'm favorable to that. But I don't feel limited by it. When the opposition health critic wants to meet with me and make proposals and engage and suggest things, I think we can move through that, because there's some occasions when issues become so urgent that there's a time to work together on those things. And I think in the Ministry of Health, what I've tried to foster is greater access to the public service for members of the opposition, working together as we have. And I think that's to my advantage as Minister of Health, because I think I accept good ideas when they come from everywhere, and I'm supportive of that. So I think we can use, there's no question we can use parliamentary committees more, and that's something that our leaders, I'm sure, in the Parliament, and our House leaders will endeavour to talk about. But I don't see that as also limiting the work that both the critic and I can do together, but also members of the Legislature can do together to advance issues. And I think that the models that I've tried to pursue as Minister of Health to do that, some of which I think have been without precedent and are good openings, can be used in other areas where issues are important, and I intend to as well. And I think there's a range of issues that are vitally important for the future of healthcare. For example, issues around health information, which are kind of fundamental issues that contain both real opportunities. Because every time we get a major report on healthcare in this country, people say, "Oh, e-health, all the potential," and a potential that sometimes is not realized. But there's also very significant privacy questions and others where I think members of the Legislature in good faith can come together and discuss what future legislation will look like, because we have both the extraordinary security demands on health systems that we're seeing right now, we've seen evidence of in the last 2 years, witness what happened at Life Labs. But in addition to that, I think in addition to that, the extraordinary opportunity and the desire for people, for example, to have access to their vaccine information, to have access to personal health information that they'll be able to use, and their clinicians in circumstances where that would be useful to them. So I think there are significant healthcare privacy and information issues, and that's one of the issues that I would look to, that I believe that in this Parliament we need to address together. I don't think it's an issue that we'd call traditionally a partisan issue, but there are real challenges. And it's the kind of issue that I think would work. And I would suggest as part of that process, or we could work with the critic and with the critic for the third party and other MLAs to see what future legislation should look like that allows us to fully enable that area of healthcare. I use that as an example of proposals. The member herself may have some, and I'm certainly open to all of that.
Member.
Thank you. So, through the chair to the minister, if it's not the standing committee, what is this ad hoc committee just going to be on an issues base then? Or what would the minister suggest in terms of some form of collaborative approach?
Minister.
Well, it might well be the standing committee, but there are processes in the House, and standing commissions or committees are essentially authorized by the House to pursue certain issues, and there may be that may be desirable, and I'd be interested, of course, in the suggestions of the honourable member as to how that might work, right? But I'm just saying that we shouldn't be limited by that in our actions. So we could also together work on other issues in a way that might be substantial, which wouldn't require the standing committee to meet everything, but we could come to agreement on the basis of those discussions. And I think the other advantage of that for the member. I think it was true for the member for Couch and the member for Colonial Lake Country previously, is it allows them to work closely with staff at the Ministry of Health on some substantial questions and develop a broader understanding of the system. So there's advantages to that from the opposition perspective, but I think advantage of that from the public perspective. So what I'm saying is that there's the select candidate committee processes, there's the usual, of course, debates in the legislatures and the working together that MLAs do all the time, but there's other options which we've worked on over time, both the committee I referred to involving the member for the Comox Valley, the member for Prince George Mount Robson, the leader of the opposition, and others. Those were ad hoc committees too, but they had a real effect at a time. And I'm open to innovation as well as the more traditional discussions that we have.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I should say. So in the fiscal plan, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, Minister. In the fiscal plan, the updated forecast for health authorities and hospital societies was $19.371 billion. The budget estimate for 21-22 was $18.271 billion. Could the minister, through the chair, explain this $1.1 billion cut to health authorities that isn't restored until 23-24 in the fiscal plan?
Minister.
Honourable Chair, welcome. Honourable Chair, simply put, there is no cut. Member will know that the allocations, and we'll talk about health authorities in a moment, but the overall Ministry of Health expenditures went up 2013-14 by 2.89%. 2014-15 by 3.32%, 2015-16 by 3.3%, 2016-17 by 3.01%, and then subsequent to this government coming to office, the significant investments in mental health and addictions, the member will know, but also primary care and surgeries and seniors care. The increases were 5.43% in 17-18, 4.73% in 18-19, and 5.07% in 19-20. What happened in 2021, of course, was different, and this is, I think, the origin of the question by the honourable member. We had another significant budget lift in the budget that was presented in February 2020, and then we had the COVID-19 pandemic. So what's happened in the pandemic is we've seen the full expenditure of regular spending and then access to contingencies, and that access to contingencies in terms of overall expenditures, as noted, is about $1.9 billion. Again, will be audited at the end of the fiscal year in terms of access to contingencies. So what we've seen is upward and continuing increases in health authority budgets. Obviously, there are some pandemic-related spending. One can think of what some of that might be in the contact tracing, the vaccine program, PPE, and so on. All of those expenditures that were contingency expenditures. But the upward, people may say, alas to this, but the upward trajectory of health authority funding from this government, which is larger than the previous government, but was continuous on the previous government as well, and is, of course, linked to spending on the Canada Health Transfer, continues. So what you have is the base funding, which has gone up year onto year, and then you have the money that was spent in contingencies. So in theory, if you take it all together, you would look last year, the 2021 increase of 15.65%, but we all know that wasn't a permanent addition to the base. But some of that was the increase in base spending that occurred in 2021, and the others was contingency spending.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So so we had 1.9 billion in addition, as the minister indicated, from last year, and then I believe that you said that there's the 1.1 billion less, so that leaves 800 million. So is that what now is being attributed to the actual COVID spend, in addition to where we're at, or you said that there was a base amount and then the contingency was the 1.9. Now we've got 1.1 billion less, so that still leaves 800 million. So is the 800 million a permanent increase, or is that COVID-related spending.
Minister.
So with respect to the 2021-22 fiscal year, there's notional access to contingencies of $992.8 million in addition to the base spending, and access to further contingencies as required. So there's a larger contingency budget. So, I mean, the reason for this, and the member talked about benchmarks, and that's why I replied to that at the beginning. The reason for that is that we know in future years, and I hesitate to use the term through the pandemic because COVID-19 is going to be with us, but hopefully not as a pandemic in the future. The important question this year, given these large contingency expenditures on these enormous, largest vaccination program in history, the vaccine comes from the federal government, the program and the delivery, which is substantial, comes from us, the very significant effort on PPE, which is a large part of our contingency expenditure last year and will be a large part of that contingency expenditure in this fiscal year, and other measures that took place in the COVID-19 pandemic were important increases in spending that were genuinely contingency spending, in the sense that we're not going to spend on 1,100 contact tracers, we hope, in future years. That's not part of the base. Equally, we're not going to run, we hope, a vaccination program like this, although we may have to run other vaccination programs, and that will be a public health question ultimately that is in front of us now, but we don't know the answer to. So that's really what the situation is. We've seen very significant increases relative to the rate of inflation in health spending, but they've been directed in particular areas. The member will know the significant expenditure on mental health and addictions, for example, the increase in the directed increase in primary care and seniors care, which increased staffing in long-term care, the increase in community care that took place, and other things that took place over those years. So we're seeing a continued increase in base spending, but access to contingencies in this second year, the second budgetary year of the pandemic. I mean, there was a little bit in February, March of the previous fiscal year, but basically through the 2020-21 fiscal year and the 21-22 fiscal year.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So under the pandemic and recovery contingencies allocations for 21-22 in the fiscal plan, there's about $900 million that's been allocated for health-related COVID-19 management. The minister seems to indicate that there's about $800 million of that that was not part of the budget last year, but I'm not following exactly the numbers there, so I'll have to look up Hansard. But could the minister provide some detail as to what he expects this funding to be used for? So the one that is in the fiscal plan, the $900 million, because it's a significant funding envelope. So I would just like to understand and would appreciate if he could explain the associated mandate.
Minister.
Thank you. Happy to, Honourable Chair. And what I'll try and do, and again, the member will know that that's access to contingencies that was part of the budget tabled by the Minister of Finance. There may potentially be the need to access greater contingencies. We hope not. There may be for this or other reasons, but within the Ministry of Health there is. So the areas in which that are attached to that notional contingency are as follows. The vaccine program for COVID-19, the immunization program, including the flu and regular vaccine program. The member will recall the very significant increases last year in our immunization program and the amount of influenza vaccine that we purchased as a province. It should be said, not all of which we used, partly because of the nature, thank you, of last year's flu season and the fact that there were very few cases, but by the beginning of December, basically we had immunized 1.4 million people, which had been the same amount as the previous year. Obviously contact tracing staffing, which continues to be important. It's less important at the 1,500 cases we have today, to be exact, the 1,537 cases we have today than it was at 11,000, but it continues to be important, and you can imagine what it's been in the first couple of months of that fiscal year. BC Centre for Disease Control capacity, you would expect that to be, and system-wide needs and capacity. The Rural Remote Collaborative Framework, which the Premier proposed on April 20th, 2020, which has increased significantly access to services in rural and Indigenous communities. That continues to have access. There's a collaborative framework around virtual care. There's the single site labor cost wage top-up. There's the screening initiatives that have been put forward. In other words, just in total, some of which are to the base and some of which are in contingencies of 7,000 healthcare workers, of which 5,000 approximately positions have been hired. There's, in addition to that, there's the surgical strategies, the majority of which is in the base, but there is some access to contingency. The hospital at home strategy, which continues to operate. Overtime costs, which are significant and estimated, but where there's directed access to contingency. And of course, increased spending on personal protective equipment.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister indicated that there is vaccine, the flu immunization program that went on with 1.4 million people, contract tracing, BC CDC, the rural and remote, virtual care, single site screening, surgical, hospital at home, overtime, and then PPE. And that's, but then the minister also indicated that some of that is in the base and some of that is actually in the allocated to the contingency. So I had asked specifically about the pandemic and recovery contingencies allocation. So could I get a specific allocation for which amounts of those aspects are in this $900 million?
Minister.
So in addition to the $900 million, there's also increases to the base. And again, what will happen as we go through this budget year is that we'll make the case, in many cases, that things that have been where we've had access to contingency will go to the base, and we'll make that application to Treasury Board, and we'll see that in the 2022-23 budget year. Just an example, obviously the access to contingency was larger in the last fiscal year, right? And we may, we hope not, but we may have a greater need to access further contingencies this year that are in contingency. But it was $1.9 billion last year. So in terms of the base, you see the seniors funding, seniors jobs funding, you see the surgical strategy, you see a number of the recruitment strategies, and then the other things are in access to contingencies. But there will be issues around that. Just as an example, we talked about the flu program. You'll remember, we'll know that flu zone was provided in long-term care this year, which is sometimes called the high dose flu vaccine was provided in long-term care. In the past fiscal year, the flu vaccine, the high dose vaccine was provided, the actual vaccine was provided by the federal government. Well, we obviously delivered it in that case. So that will be something that will make the case in future fiscal years to go into the base, if that's the decision at that time of the government to proceed with that, for example. So it was the full allocation last year, plus the $1.9 billion access to contingency. The full allocation this year, which includes some extras to the base already, access to contingency of just under $1 billion, and then potentially other access to contingencies. And it'll be next year when we'll see really the full post-pandemic effect on all this in terms of the continuing increase in spending for the Ministry of Health.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the further $1.1 billion that's reserved for unanticipated urgent health or recovery measures. So then how is that mandate different or associated with the allocation that the minister gave previously? Sorry, I'll repeat. So the 1.1 billion of contingency, of actual contingency, right? Unanticipated urgent health or recovery measures. How is the mandate different for that 1.1 billion than the list that the minister gave me previous to that, which is the 900 million of increased funding in the fiscal plan for COVID-19 specifically?
Minister.
So essentially what happens with contingency votes, and it happened this year, is that when you have a contingency fund that is managed, so the Minister of Finance has allocated 982 million to contingencies this year. Get that number right. There we are. It's 992.8, sorry, 992.8 to contingencies this year. That's the contingency vote is managed by the Ministry of Finance. There's been an allocation of that to the Ministry of Health, and potentially more. If we required more, we would essentially make application for that through the Treasury Board process. So those are the items, the ones I've mentioned, that are access to contingency. The rest is already allocated. So if you look at the overall budget of the Ministry of Health, 23,129,936 in budget in this budget year, and you see that the increases by the different, or should I say in the budget 2020, that was the base, 23,129,936, and you see that the budget April 2021 is 23,872,948, and on top of that is the access to contingencies.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to repeat for the minister and for my own understanding. So I apologize if I'm being too repetitive, but just to further understand. So I'd asked about the pandemic and recovery contingencies allocations, which is 900 million that's been allocated into the areas of category, and I won't repeat them again because I think that we were in agreement that I had captured those. And that's the mandate for that 900 million, but there's a further 1.1 billion reserved for unanticipated urgent health or recovery measures. So my question was actually, what is the mandate associated with the 1.1 that is different than the 900 million?
Minister.
So the difference between the nine, got to get this number right in my head, nine, essentially the 900 million plus and the 1.1 billion is when I said that we could write to apply to contingencies above the 900 million, that's what that contingencies budget is. And we would apply to that, but so potentially could other ministries. And as a member will know, the COVID-19 pandemic affects more than the direct expenditure of the Ministry of Health. So that would be available to us, but that would be available to other ministries as well.
Member.
Thank you. Just for a clarification, are you waiting for me to stand up first?
Normally that's what we do, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I just always hesitate going, say it. Okay, thank you. We're on board now. I will jump. So just don't say how high. So I so appreciate, through the chair to the minister, thank you for that explanation. That does make sense. So the 1.1 billion is reserved for other ministries as well as for health in these particular categories. The 900 and some million is actually for these particular categories specifically, but these specific categories can be increased by the 1.1 billion or applied for some further funding if necessary for the unanticipated urgent health or recovery measures. And I don't mean to be redundant or to simply state it, but this is a massive contingency, obviously. And we did see the budget go up last year because of the emergent issues at hand with the pandemic, absolutely imperative. But there's also needs to be some rigor applied at this point to sort of figure out where the new normal is and the next normal in terms of moving forward. So I do appreciate that, that further explanation and for my understanding. So I just, my next question to, through the chair to the minister is, are these notional allocations at the ministry's discretion or at Treasury's discretion in terms of other ministries coming and applying for these funds?
Minister.
On the 1.1 billion, those would be at the discretion of the Minister of Finance, effectively of Treasury Board. Now, I'm a member of Treasury Board, but Treasury Board functions as a group, and the member will know when Health presents to Treasury Board, I'm not on the board, so I'm not making the presentation and making the decision. Alas, such a good idea. But nonetheless, the discretion and the control over the contingency budgets is in the hands of the Minister of Finance. So, you wouldn't have a situation, it's not the 900 plus million, which is allocated and directed to the Ministry of Health. That's, I wouldn't say it's at our discretion because we have to, of course, report regularly to the Minister of Finance about that, but we have more flexibility in the utilization of that, of course. And with respect to the 1.1 billion, that's under the discretion of the Minister of Finance. I think it is fair to say that this is a large contingency allocation in a sort of historic sense in BC, and I think it makes sense to people that you would do that under the particular circumstances that we're under in both the last fiscal year and now in this fiscal year. And that's why additional capacity was voted by the Legislature in the 2020-21 fiscal year, and why we're seeing this budget presented in this way. Because, of course, we're still in the pandemic, we're still in a provincial emergency, and it will be, I think, well, we moved to step 2 of our reopening plan, or we will be tomorrow, and announced it today. We still have a way to go before we all get back to normal.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And understanding that it is a significant amount of money, and I would agree with the minister that, an 8.3333333% contingency on top of an increased budget is certainly exceptional. And so my question, and then I'll move on to my next set of questions, but my question would be this: do we or can we anticipate that this 8.3% contingency will not appear in the next budget? All things considered, and hoping that the pandemic is thus over.
Minister.
There's I think he's the job minister in Ireland. He used to be the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, who said that the pandemic has a way of messing with our plans. Except he's, and so I don't think I could fully speculate as to what the impact of the pandemic will be on the 2022-23 budget year and the impact of contingencies. But I think it's fair to say the member's correct in the sense that I don't think we're going to see a continuation of this level of contingency, because this level of contingency is really based on a known unknown, the effect of the pandemic, both on finances and on the demands on government services. And we hope, knowing what we know now, knowing that this may change, knowing the pandemic has been unusual in recent, at least in the recent history, we should return to a smaller level of contingencies next year. I would expect that. Whether it will be entirely gone, I'm not sure, but I don't think in general that you would operate on the basis of such a contingency into the long term. But what it'll look like next year, we'll see, and that depends on some things under our control and some things that aren't.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I totally appreciate the minister's answer, and definitely in agreement there. Obviously, our best laid plans can go awry with yes, the nature of exception. My next question is on the actual vaccine rollout. One of the most difficult aspects of the last year was that spending was, in large part, had to be reactionary and urgent and mostly unbudgeted. And I want to ask, through the chair to the minister, what is the cost of just the vaccine rollout to date? And what is the anticipated total cost of the vaccine rollout in the budget in the one budget before us today?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I think the member is of course correct that we decided to mount this vaccine program, which I think it's fair to say, and everyone would say, its effectiveness and efficiency is important for everything else we do, including and this is maybe not the most important thing, government revenues, because the return to normalcy is important for businesses, and it has, to a great degree, allowed that. So I think most people would say that it's money well spent. And we don't, the short answer is we don't fully know what it will cost. We're in the midst of it. We know that that cost just for the vaccine program will be north of $100 million. By which I mean more than $100 million, just to be clear, and perhaps more than that. The program to date, 3.4 million first doses, 600,000 second doses as of Sunday evening. It's a little more than that now. I think has been an exceptional effort, and every part of it, of course, costs in terms of the need to stand up and have that many people working in that area, and at significant cost in each case, whether it's the AstraZeneca rollout to pharmacies where we pay a regular fee, which is reasonable, or the clinics that we've put in place. What I'd endeavor to do as we get through the next few months is as we get towards the end, I'd endeavor to take the opportunity to brief both the opposition, the Green Party, and others as to what we think the expected cost is. But right now, our pressure has been get the IT system up and running. They did, and it's been quite successful. Get the clinics up and running. And as of Sunday night, we delivered almost 99% of the vaccine we'd received of Pfizer, and basically with help for second doses, all of the Moderna and the AstraZeneca as well. The member will know as well that we put Dr. Penny Ballum in charge of that effort, working with Dr. Henry and our teams at the Ministry of Health, including Mr. Pokorny, the Associate Deputy Minister, who's played a significant role in both, I talked about PPE, but both that and the logistics of vaccine. We'll put an outstanding, experienced person in charge of that, and told her to go, and she has gone with an intensity and the speed that she's known for. Remember, we'll know that Dr. Ballum is a former Deputy Minister of Health under the previous government, but also has served in many, many other positions in his places, and she's currently also the chair of the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority. So, but to say it's Dr. Penny Ballum, and thousands and thousands and thousands of other people, and I think Dr. Ballum will be the first to recognize that. So our expectation is that the cost is going to be significant, that we don't know the full cost of it yet. Our effort and my direction has been to drive it through with all the intensity required. In other words, deliver vaccine at pace and at speed, because the cost to society, but also actually the financial cost, will always be less than that cost. But it's going to be a very significant cost when we come to the end of it. And it's why we use contingency budgets in this place. We won't have to do that, we hope, next year, at least not in the same way. This is more than a notional allocation of contingencies. This is what we talk about when we say we're allocating to contingencies, and we're going to need that money. And within that contingency budget, we may, in the end, be moving things to vaccine if that's where the significant costs are.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the 100 million that we have approximately, and I'll say approximately because I recognize that it's going to be way more than 100 million. I'm getting hand gestures from the minister saying it's going to be more, and let's say upwards of 100 million for ease. So, of that 100 million, does the minister have a breakdown as to how much is going towards staff, how much is going towards the actual overhead of the facilities, et cetera? Is the minister operating off of a budget at this point?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. It's great to see you there. Again, it's just can't get over that. It was wonderful in the room upstairs, and it's still wonderful down here, so it's good. To say to the member for Kelowna Mission that some of us haven't seen each other very much, even in our own caucuses since the election. So it's good to see one another from time to time. I'd say the three large costs really. Staff costs, which will be very significant in the case of all things, or cost to practitioners. So in the case of the distribution to pharmacy, for example, that portion of the program, which is roughly 250,000 first doses, and to date about, I think, 45,000 second doses under in the AstraZeneca program. And that will be more, of course. That would be fees, but effectively that's staff costs. Staff costs are fees. The second big item is the digital platform, which was a significant, and we believe will be a legacy to the province. So the capital infrastructure of that will all be dealt with, and the sort of investment will be dealt with in this year, but the benefit will be long-standing because that will be a platform for all vaccines through the future, and and we decided to build it with the long-term in mind. So that's the second set of things which are important. The third set of things that are important is that we've essentially, we've got hundreds of permanent sites that we've leased for significant periods of time, really from, in many cases, with the larger and the broader rollout, because most of the larger amounts of vaccine came in March, from March through to September, effectively. And those are significant lease costs, whether they're in my constituency, the Italian Cultural Center, or all the pop-up sites we're producing. All of those have significant costs. And then the fourth set of costs will be the cost of distribution of the vaccine within British Columbia. And that is, that logistical task is one of the most challenging and significant. And it's one of the advantages, for example, we're going to get more Moderna soon, of being able to have both Pfizer and Moderna at one site. And our hope that the Moderna will soon be approved for 12 to 17, that will ease some of the logistical burden. But there's significant logistical burden. The vaccine itself is not a cost against the provincial treasury. That's been provided by the federal government. The landing, until it lands in British Columbia, often at multiple locations, but the distribution from there is a significant cost. So those are the large levels of cost, and our push is to get it done. And so we didn't say, well, you've got X amount to spend and can't spend more than that. We said, build a platform that we can use in the long term, hire the staff we need to distribute the vaccine, negotiate the fee schedules that you need to, and the payment schedules you need for doctors and nurses and others who are doing the vaccine, and then go forward. And it's in that respect, unlike anything that I've done before, I would say, as Minister of Health. One exception to that would probably be our investment in personal protective equipment last year, where we were significantly spending on personal protective equipment, and we were saying, you know, get us this equipment, because we needed our healthcare workers to have that equipment, and it wasn't a question. So we did obviously pay, like everyone else in the world, significant premiums at that time. You'll see that, and we'll probably discuss what that budget line item was for last year, or its estimated amount for last year, and that's significant. So in that respect, the pandemic's been unusual, because usually we are very precise about these things, and you make a proposal to the Treasury Board and you say, I want to create a network of primary care networks, and here's what we're going to fund them for, and here's the base cost of the base, and so on. And you go forward from fiscal year to fiscal year. These are very significant one-time costs and expenditures, and in terms of the vaccine distribution, we're going to be paying the cost, because that was seen as necessary in a provincial emergency.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So understanding that the minister doesn't know that what the total amount will be yet, but understanding that we weren't working off of a budget, because obviously this was abnormal times, and understanding that we have the 4 categories: the staff costs, including the pharmacies, the digital platform, and then the leases or overhead, and then the distribution costs. Does the minister have the costs to date? And what would be the percentages of these 4 categories within those costs to date?
Minister.
Thank you. The short answer is no. We're a quarter way into the fiscal year, obviously, so it's not a normal reporting period. But the member will see some of these reflected in the first quarterly report, which is due for the first period, the period ending June 30th, which will be released usually in August, I think it is. In August, we'll start to see the first quarterly report, and of course, the member will see in the public accounts for last year those amounts. So we don't have sort of an interim figure. I mean, obviously, these things are being tracked, but these are things about which governments tend to be very precise, and so that's when the member can expect to see those amounts.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm being told that I'm much louder than the minister, so I'm trying to back away slowly from the microphone. But regarding the provincial vaccine registry system, which was, I believe, number 2 on the digital platform that was on your list, or on the minister's list, through the chair to the minister, was this done internally or contracted out, and if so, to whom?
Minister.
Deloitte and Salesforce played a very significant role in the development of the digital platform. Extraordinary efforts by the people at Service BC as well, and in technology at the Ministry of Health, which were very important, obviously the Provincial Health Office as well, and the folks at TELUS who, had 1 or 2 days that were challenging at the beginning. At one point during the the first days of the sort of registration process for our elders have just done an exceptional job with the call centers. I think the experience that people have had with the call centers over the period of the pandemic has just been excellent, and the folks at TELUS have done a good job. So those have been the key players, Salesforce, Deloitte, huge resources internally in government, and then obviously on the call centers, TELUS played a big role.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a lot of different moving parts in terms of Deloitte, Salesforce, Service BC, Ministry of Health, and TELUS. But of the external ones, that would be Deloitte, Salesforce, and TELUS. How were the contracts awarded? And then I'll actually ask the second question as well, because I think they can be answered together from the minister. So is this a single system, or is it actually a network of integrated systems? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you. With respect to TELUS, it's part of a broader agreement we have with TELUS that predates my time as Minister of Health, but has continued through that time. So it was under the auspices of that broader governmental agreement. You see, I'm trying to speak up. I've got to work at that over time. And with respect to Deloitte and Salesforce, they played an important role with the federal government working on these issues, and essentially they were direct awarded. In other words, they were selected because of the quality of their work. Not everybody can do this work, but they were, and I think evidence is that they really did an excellent job for us. We see this in the public response to the registration system. I mean, any registration system, given the light that has been shone on this vaccination process, will be important. But I think the registration system has performed exceedingly well, and those folks and the folks who work with them. So, you know, with respect to TELUS, our teams at Citizen Services play an important role, and they work with the folks at TELUS work with us on a lot of health information very well. And the other two have done a very good job, and all of that was done under the direction of Dr. Ballin.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to the minister, how does this system integrate across the health authorities? Is it one system that is actually operated under the Ministry of Health, or is it a series of smaller systems that are underneath each of the different health authorities?
Minister.
Thank you. I mean, the beauty of it, and I'm quoting now Mr. Pokorny, the beauty of it is it's one system, and it works with our registry. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a legacy system, and you don't want to create new legacies that have the challenges of the past. And this isn't. This is one of the challenges with health information in general, in BC and in other jurisdictions, is that we often have different systems and different health authorities. A member will know this from her time in Interior Health, and it's one of the challenges that is faced. But in this case, we have a legacy system, and we wouldn't want to necessarily repeat some of the flaws of existing systems in that legacy.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I love that it is a it is
Members, could you please mute yourselves?
So I love that the system is one system integrated across all of the different health authorities. Another quick question on this, and that is that is it only a vaccine registration system? Do you want me to stop? Okay. Does it only register vaccines and schedule vaccines, or is the system, does it actually able to go into or integrate into other systems as well? Sorry for my distraction.
Maybe, apparently this problem with the sound system isn't Zoom, so let me just talk with the Hansard here for a second. Possibly we could get it fixed before we continue. I think you're probably distracted by it like I am. Okay, we'll call the committee back to order. Sorry, we're going to soldier on here. We think we know what the problem is, and we'll get it fixed. But thank you very much, Minister. Do you need the question to be restated, or okay, Minister?
No, Honourable Chair, I was just admiring my colleague from Colonial Mission just soldiering through with that question. I thought that was admirable. I think it's the real value of the system, and what makes it a legacy is that, yes, you can book appointments, and that's important. Obviously, we're seeing that right now. But it's also a registry, so it'll be access for all of us once we release this to access their own vaccine information, and ultimately their own vaccine information, not just for COVID-19 vaccines, but for other vaccines that they require. And so that's hugely valuable. It's obviously a valuable source of information on immunization, so that we can now, and you see it posted every week, tell people that in Renfrew Collingwood Community Health Service area, based on PH, the personal health numbers against that, we know that 80.4% of people have received the vaccine, for example. Or in West Kelowna, it's another amount. So it provides that and other information that we're able to tie and provide a better analysis of immunization campaign efforts. But basically, it's a legacy for the future, I think, both for individuals, but also for our health system, and a necessary one. That will help everybody in future track immunizations. We don't know what that will necessarily look like in the future related to COVID-19, but we know immunizations are broadly important. And so we wanted to create a system. We asked to create a system, and we talked to Deloitte and Salesforce, and we gave direction to Dr. Ballin to do this that would stand us in good stead right now, but stand us in good stead into the future. So this is a flexible platform. If it was just a registration system, then it wouldn't have had the long-term value. And we think that long-term value in the information that people will be able to access about their own information, but also its long-term values to the healthcare system would be significant.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the system is a vaccination registry / data collection service that then stores all of vaccination information for all of our citizenry and allows us to access that information as we need or as we see fit. And it currently does or does not integrate with any other system. Is it a standalone, or does it actually integrate with other data collection systems or other systems? Or is this just simply for vaccines?
Minister.
Thank you. It might have other utility with other systems, but right now it builds on existing vaccine registries and then allows us through all of our immunization programs, whether they be flu immunization, childhood immunization, and obviously COVID-19 immunization right now, but others. It allows us to have both population health information, which is important for the provincial health officer and others, but really importantly, individual information. One of the things that I think is important, I think the member would probably agree with this, that we have to empower and give access to people to have access to their own health information. We've got to ensure that other people don't have access to it, that it's your information. So a lot of its value for public health is in population level information. Obviously we keep that information, but it's also important that the member, when she's accessing her information, that of her family or others together, is able to do that. We know, and this is where the registry will be important as well, potentially in the development of what some people call vaccine passports, but one's ability to demonstrate, the need to demonstrate that we've been vaccinated, perhaps for people to travel and for other purposes. And what you want to do is empower individuals so that they can demonstrate that on their own, and not, for example, you wouldn't provide this information to others, instruments of, whether it be border agencies or whatever, for that purpose. So, I think that that's the value of the system, is what it gives to individuals.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll move on to a different question here. As the minister is aware, Health Canada has authorized the Pfizer vaccine to be stored at regular refrigerated temperatures, as well as several provinces are currently allowing pharmacies to administer Pfizer and even Moderna in some cases. So my curiosity is this, and through the chair to the minister, why is BC not using pharmacies for the rollout of second doses of Pfizer and Moderna?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. I think what we've done in BC, and I think we'd have to recognize this, is put an immunization program in place that's worked with great efficiency, such that, as I say, and members heard me say this, so I won't say it again, but last Sunday we essentially delivered all the Pfizer that we had through immunization clinics around BC. We have used as the pharmacy network. They have a good distribution system, which is organized by a company called McKesson in British Columbia. They have a good distribution system for AstraZeneca. So, and that was no small task. There's a tendency to say, oh, well, it's just AstraZeneca. Well, that was hundreds of thousands of people at a vitally important time. And now it's going to be a very significant number, in the hundreds of thousands, certainly more than 100,000. We'll see what the ultimate number is of second doses with AstraZeneca, and that will be based on individual choices people have, where we use the pharmacy system for that purpose. And I think our pharmacists did a very good job. We transitioned very quickly, as the member will know, when the change in use for AstraZeneca was decided at the national, the provincial, and the international level in terms of its change of use in the month of March. Pharmacies stepped up, and they've done a good job. Our system, though, is very efficient. These large vaccination centers in every part of the province have worked out well. And so we're balancing those things. And right now, in our view, in the view of the people who have been in charge of the program, the most efficient way to deliver Pfizer and Moderna, originally, as the member will say, there were some significant limits in terms of its distribution of those things because of the temperature at which they needed to be stored. But these are challenging vaccines, nonetheless, Pfizer and Moderna, to deal with. It was felt that this approach would be the best approach. And I think if we look at the success in British Columbia, overall in terms of delivery of the vaccine, particularly the level of first doses, we see that system has worked quite well. It's the most efficient system, but it's not any disrespect to pharmacy. In fact, pharmacy has played a critical role as well through the provision of first doses for AstraZeneca and second doses. But it's our expectation that we're going to continue to work through the system for the moment. There will be a time, I think, when we get past the broader need to have permanence to stand up these large clinics, right? And there will be, I think, in the future, a role for pharmacy to play, especially in the final stages of the Pfizer-Moderna campaign. That may be the case. But for the moment, we think this is the most efficient approach.
Member.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the minister for that answer. Obviously, we are seeing somewhat of spotty pickup in certain areas, or differences in vaccination rates in certain areas. And we have moved from large vaccination centers to pop-up clinics or other ways that we can find people or make it more convenient for people. And with respect to, issues of racism or discrimination within the healthcare system, offering more access and to a larger population in, more frequency, higher hours or a greater number of hours per day, et cetera, could help to overcome some of, I think, the provincial health officer has her 3 C's, convenience and I can't remember what the other 2 are right now, so I apologize. But there are 3 C's, and one of those is convenience. And one of the things that makes pharmacies so effective is that they are convenient. They are throughout. I appreciate, and I am very encouraged to hear the minister say that there will be some utilization within the second dose. Obviously, we want to see our arenas and those different aspects of our economy going back into full swing, and we have been given some indication that by September that might be the case. So is the minister today, through the chair to the minister, committing to seeing some form of the program being allocated through pharmacies?
Minister.
No, I'm not committing to. What you have, and this is the issue with Pfizer, is 30 days max. They come in trays of 975 that are challenging to break down. And so this is right now the most effective way to deliver that vaccine. This week, 50 pop-up clinics, largely and disproportionately in the Interior and the Northern Health Authority, are being put in place to address some of these issues. In Fort St. John, for example, we've sent a number, Honourable Chair, of BC-CDC nurses to support efforts there and to increase access there. We've gone to many communities, in the hundreds, to do whole community approaches to immunization in Indigenous communities and other communities. So I'm not committing to that, but what I am saying is that I think there will be, it's my expectation, as we work through the major immunization of second dose, that as we get later on, and say people who have just decided not to be immunized and want to be immunized later on, and say October and November, that's likely to be through their local pharmacies, I would guess, because we're not going to just continue to have mass vaccination stations. So that process, once we get through the end of the mass vaccination, mass immunization process, will include inevitably doctors' offices, inevitably pharmacy, right? That's what I'm referring to. And pharmacies are playing a big role right now. I think on Thursday and Friday of last week, it was about 8,000 doses each day of AstraZeneca as we built up. I think it's somewhere between 40 and 50,000 second doses of AstraZeneca in the sort of 8 days, I think it's been, since we've basically had second dose allocations of AstraZeneca. And so that's a big part of the process. And clearly we've got lots of work to do. And what we're trying to do is to deliver it to the largest number of people in the most efficient way. And that means going to where they are, as Dr. Henry has said. And we saw this at the beginning of the pandemic when we went to Hartley Bay and many other communities around BC and delivered it. And it was extraordinarily moving to do that, which was whole of community. And we've seen whole of community second dose for some time now in many Indigenous communities, but other communities as well. And we're going to continue to do that. So I think it's, again, it's not disrespectful to pharmacies. They are playing an important role. The final thing I'd say is this, that the main limitation we've had in the distribution of vaccine from the beginning has been the amount of vaccine we've had. And we've been getting vaccines, sometimes inconsistently from the federal government, but they've done overall, I think, a good job in getting us vaccine. And in recent weeks, that's been about 327,000 doses. And we've been delivering more than 327,000 doses every week. But the limit on our vaccine that we can administer to people. The limit on that is the amount of vaccine we have. And that's, I guess, obvious, but it's still important to note. And finally, I'd say that in the health authorities, such as the North and the Interior, because we sometimes hear this discussion, well, you're allocating differently. What you see in the North and the Interior Health Authority is a somewhat higher level of second dose, right? But we've got to do a lot of work to make sure that the level of first dose is up to the level of the other health authorities. You see this in some other jurisdictions who are ahead of us in second dose. It's because they made the move to second dose earlier than we did, because we've had, I think, collectively done a good job at encouraging people to get first doses. And so we're at 76% of those over 18, 74% of those over 12 have received their first dose. And we're starting to make progress, and we're going to close the gap on second doses soon.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So let's move to PPE for a moment. We're discovering more and more about this virus all the time, including the BC CDC acknowledging the aerosol transmission. So are we using appropriate PPE for this discovery? Is that changing our approach at all on personal protective equipment? So to the chair, through the chair to the minister, are we effectively using PPE in a way that has adjusted based on the aerosol transmission?
Minister.
This is the point where the member, the chair, members of the legislature watching on pay-per-view. It's not pay-per-view over there. It's not pay-per-view over there. And the public that's watching wishes Dr. Bonnie Henry was here to answer this question herself, because she'd be, I've heard her answer the question probably, I want to say 150 times. And she still does it better than me. I think it might be the, decade of training before she took on her job as provincial health officer, and the years of experience. Just in a general sense, and we have adapted with respect to the utilization of PPE over time, and all of that has been under the direction of public health. And we've obviously consulted extensively with groups of workers in different workplaces. Our principal focus is on healthcare workers, however, and those in the health system. So our utilization of PPE, and this is primarily still sort of a droplet-based transmission of a virus, but also to use what are called respirators, and N95 respirators generally. This is a standard in aerosol producing procedures. We also have now a point of care process to assess the needs of healthcare workers for the utilization of respirators. So this has been a science-based approach from the beginning, directed by public health. I think that's been the right approach. My approach and my requirement has been to ensure that the supply of PPE is adequate. And we saw, if you look through the pandemic, a very significant increase in utilization of PPE starting in February of 2020. That increased, and I made repeated and detailed public presentations about PPE until I was convinced that the public had had enough of my lengthy presentations of PPE, and but the information is out there, and we'll have more discussion of it. But through that time, so we went through a period where we saw a massive increase in utilization, and the decision by principally the United States, which was a source of a huge amount of PPE for British Columbia, to not fulfill contracts with British Columbia and virtually every other jurisdiction in the world for PPE, and all the efforts that we made to get PPE, which may be subject to the members' subsequent questions. But our approach on the substance of it, on the utilization of PPE, has been founded through the advice of Dr. Henry and her teams at the BC CDC, and we've been well served by that, I think, and as have healthcare workers. And we took steps early on to make sure that we had the proper utilization of PPE and through the pandemic, and I think those efforts have been very strong. That said, many people in the healthcare system, of course, would like more access and different access, and that's been a discussion. But that's why having those decisions founded on the basis of decisions by public health is the right approach.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So could the minister describe what the overall additional spend on PPE was, specifically related to COVID?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I'll give the member a little bit of comparison, just because these are all numbers, right? And comparison really helps. At least it helps me. The total amount for PPE in 1920 in the healthcare system, that included a little bit of expenditure at the beginning of the pandemic, was $81.2 million. The total expenditure on PPE for the period April 1, 2020 to March 31st, 2021 was $470 million. I should note that this amount is unaudited, right? So there will be final information. There's audited information in the public accounts, but I wanted to share it. I want to share as much of this information as we can, and as I noted before, the member will understand that that it is unaudited and will be presented in full later. In addition to that, there have been extraordinary freight costs, which are in addition to the other costs, borne by the Provincial Health Services Authority of $17.343 million, and of the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority of $2.633 million.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the minister, am I allowed to quote from previous estimates? Okay, thank you. So in your estimates with my colleague and the leader of the opposition, you did say at one point, quote, "We need to build out our PPE inventory so that in the next crisis we'll be more prepared for that." Yes, but we need also domestic supply, because domestic supply has been proven to be absolutely necessary in these times. I mean, we must continue to have that, end quote. And I do appreciate that was what the minister was indicating. Obviously, when the U.S. shut down our sources, that's a traumatic event, especially at such a desperate time. So appreciated the extraordinary efforts that had to be taken in order to actually secure the PPE. Having said that, my question is this: of the $470 million that's unaudited in terms of the PPE, how much, or could the minister indicate how much of that is still in supply or extraordinary supply, and how much of that was actually utilized within the course of that time frame?
Minister.
So, Honourable Chair, interesting. From March 1st, 2020 to May 19th, 2021, so not quite the range of the fiscal year I talked about, we've issued 383,174,214 pieces of PPE. Yeah, different types of PPE. So respirators, masks, gloves, gowns, eye protection, principally, right? Those 5 categories. And we have an inventory now, 388,862,711. So obviously we continue to build that out. So just to put it in context, most of our PPE we now have on hand at a higher level, so of utilization, right? Between 143 and 180 days. There's some specific categories where it's more like a month, but that's a portion because there are different sizes of different PPE products. But essentially, we're building out the amount of PPE we have on hand. So the purpose of spending all that money wasn't just to deal with our immediate demands, but to also develop our stockpiles so we would have stockpiles of months and potentially more in advance.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So with the volume of dollars that we're talking about here, 470 million unaudited dollars, are we, and also the minister's indication for a domestic supply, are we actually using some form of a Buy BC preference to really use those dollars that have to be spent on really increasing the amount of companies that are here locally and that could supply those for us?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And the chair often seems surprised, but you know, I'd actually be more surprised if someone else got up. So I was, I just say that, but it's good. Yeah, I think 2 things. One, we are working closely. We don't give preference to local manufacturers. The member will, in the sense that we can simply apply that. The member will know there are limitations on that approach, but we do provide a lot of information and support, access to lab for testing of PPE. We do have a number of successful companies, and what I endeavor to do, because we have a list of them, is maybe provide that list to the honourable member, and so you can see some of that development. I think it's a national question, though, and you know, I always think that when I hear people talk about national security questions, I always think that that's a little elevated, but in this case, it's real. You know, all of us, Mr. Picorni, all of our health authority chairs and CEOs, Dr. Brown, myself, everybody was working on this question of supply of PPE early on in the pandemic. And so I think for us as an entire country, we need to develop collectively amongst the provinces, and the federal government has a central role in this and grabs the central role in this, wants the central role in this. We have to develop a greater domestic capacity such that we're not dependent, for example, on 3M not being able to deliver its respirator products to us in a period of when we need them, you know, and without criticizing the American government for its conduct, because they dealt with a very serious pandemic themselves. I think as a country, as we come through this pandemic, we need to develop together federal, provincial governments, the business community, and we do have to support that local development and be prepared to support it. And we are in BC, and we're working with a number of companies, including companies in Kelowna, companies around the province that are doing that, because I think that there's a big role for BC companies. We have some outstanding companies in BC that we like to support us, and I think the evidence is, and we don't know whether the next time we face a crisis it will be exactly like this in terms of these things, but we do know that we need PPE, and I'd argue we need a domestic source of the production of vaccine in this country, and those were decisions by past federal governments to give up that to a degree, to sell Connaught, and then after that to make other decisions. So we didn't have any domestic capacity. But, you know, if we were having the estimates right now in February, and we were having this debate in February, we'd be talking a lot more about domestic capacity of vaccine than we are now, when we have more vaccine and we're at a different point. But at that point, in January and February, it sure would have been nice to have millions more doses of vaccine to distribute then in British Columbia and everywhere else in Canada. So these questions of PPE and vaccines, I think, are national questions, but also provincial questions as we come out of this pandemic. How do we ensure in the private sector or the public sector, but I think primarily it would be the private sector, that we have sufficient sources of PPE in the future and vaccines in the future.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So earlier on, we discussed the extraordinary costs and the measures that the 900 million plus the 1.1 billion in terms of the notional accounts, and PPE was in there. Just now, we've talked about the 470 million that was the unaudited amount for 2021. In the 21-22 budget, what actual amount do we have allocated for PPE in terms of the base? And what is actually coming out of that contingency line item for PPE?
Yes, member.
Can I just add one more question that kind of is related? So through the chair to the minister also, and the next question that I have is, and what is the revert after that this next year? So what will it revert to? So what will we assume will be increased in terms of the supply that you want to have, that the minister wants to have on hand, and what will be reverted back to a post-pandemic era?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And I'd say there's three factors involved. One is that, and this is an important question in terms of government budgeting, the prices continue to be high for PPE, but it's our expectation that those prices will come down. And so this is one of the reasons why we wouldn't necessarily say, well, it's going to be X dollars for the next 5 years, or the X dollars plus inflation for the next 5 years, because clearly, I'll just give the member just some examples of that, if that's okay. Respirators pre-COVID, 62 cents. COVID peak, $5 to $9.25. Currently $4.75 to $6.75. Masks have come back now. I would say 15 cents pre-COVID, 46 cents to $1.25 COVID peak, now 11 cents to 30 cents. And there's other examples, and I'd be happy to share this information with the member just to give her a sense. So that's an important question. So I did note that just for the sake of understanding that what it was prior to in the previous fiscal year, I think it was in the 81.2 million in 1920, and so the total expenditure. And when I say unaudited, it means that we don't deliver the public accounts till July, so it's or August, and they don't come through. And at that point, they will be audited. But it's my expectation that this year it will be the sort of previous amount plus in the neighborhood of $150 million for this year. So the 81 plus 150 for this year. So roughly 231. And then we'll assess. Our goal is to continue to push out to 9 months supply for PPE. And so we're going to continue to purchase this, pushing out to that amount. That's kind of our goal and that goal may expand. So what it is in the 2022-23 fiscal year, which is why we use contingency money, will depend on the state of the market at that time. But what we'll do, as we understand that, is we will return as we present a budget, and the member and I have this debate next year, and I go to Treasury Board and say, well, this is the present state of things, this is what we need to meet our target, and apply for that, and that may see, I don't think there's any question, a raising of the previous base, but we need both the prices to stabilize, and we hope that happens for all of our sakes, and to understand where we are at that point, and then we can make those decisions.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. And I would be very happy to receive that spreadsheet on the PPE, so much appreciated. To turn us now to rapid testing, my question through the chair to the minister is, what did we learn from the pilot projects, including the recently completed pilot project at UBC, now undergoing the second one, and now actually being expanded to SFU, and what was recommended?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. With respect to point of care testing, the member will know, and I won't repeat because I think the member will have seen the discussion I had with the Leader of the Opposition on this question and the process of validation. Those were issues that are already in the estimate, so I'll save the members some time. I think that the first important thing to recognize is that there are a number of different types of rapid tests. Again, in the previous estimates and previous in the estimates I took people through, so they serve somewhat different purposes, and some of them are different in the sense that they require, for example, a healthcare professional to apply and others don't, which obviously deals and addresses issues of cost. But I think that two things have occurred, I would say, to the member. One, that we have developed a policy since March the 4th of access to rapid testing. It's been used especially in rural and remote communities where I think it has real value because it provides information very quickly to healthcare professionals when the PCR tests are further away from the lab. It's had real impact and positive impact in congregate circumstances, for example, correctional services, and the avoidance of significant outbreaks there. And we've seen the use of rapid testing in those circumstances in long-term care in the case of some schools. And what we've had in BC, and there is a debate around rapid testing, of course, which I hear frequently, but what we've had in BC is a rapid testing and a testing approach that's been guided by public health. And they established the policy that we put in place on March the 4th, which continues to evolve. We have many, for example, businesses in BC now that have applied to and are using rapid testing. And I expect in the months to follow, we'll be using it increasingly. But what was important both in rapid testing and PCR testing in BC, which is the gold standard of testing, that it was directed by our public health officials. Its utilization was directed. And that makes it different than some other jurisdictions where they seem to think that the test of success was the number of tests that we used. And so we have also, there's been a federal process. Remember, we'll know Sue Page, who's a distinguished British Columbian, was involved and has been involved in that process, has provided more advice as well. So I think there have been lessons in terms of utilization. It's why we're utilizing more and more, and I would expect as the months pass, there'll be more and more utilization of rapid testing. We're seeing the first in Canada as well, at-home tests that are available as well to individuals. The utilization of such tests has been a mixed success in other jurisdictions, and so we're not just learning about the use of rapid tests in British Columbia from the pilots that have been put in place in BC, but in the utilization around the world. And Dr. Henry and Dr. Gustafson and all our teams in public health are connected to all of those, so we continue to provide advice. But we have found in a number of important circumstances that rapid testing has been a valuable addition to our PCR testing, and we're continuing to use it, and that's advanced. We went through validation, pilots, significant and increasing usage, and I expect we'll see more usage in the months to come.
Member, this will be our last question because we must end at 6 o'clock because there'll be a division vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Much appreciated. And that is encouraging news from the minister on just rapid testing and its use. I agree there has been an evolution of the testing, of the tests themselves, of the approvals of the tests, and obviously we're learning all the time. So I appreciate that this evolution. And I do appreciate that we're watching other jurisdictions because I think that's very important, especially as we open the economy and open our borders. Because we want to keep our own citizens safe. So through the chair to the minister, is there funding allocated for expanding the use of the rapid testing as our economies and borders open?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and I think I have a motion to read at the end of this answer. So I've been prepped for that. So you can keep me in line in that regard, just in case I forget. Because occasionally I say to the member for Kelowna Mission, I give long answers. I'm trying. People keep telling me, it's less, just do less. I think the short answer is that we now have fairly free access for businesses to rapid testing. In some cases, those businesses seek support from us, so we're working on a framework to put that in place. Those obviously include areas of long-term care, but also other businesses that are using rapid testing as well, and the need to connect to our systems effectively. So I think a lot of that work is happening with the business community. There's fairly free access to rapid testing in the sense that they're being provided and then distributed, not the at-home tests, which aren't really widely available in Canada yet, but they may be. So the short answer to the question is yes. And with that, Honourable Speaker, I move that Honourable Chair say, maybe one day, we'll see. I almost promoted you there, and the clerk was saying, oh boy. There we go. I know, there you go. I move that the committee rise, report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. Yeah, the exact same reaction as the Leader of the Opposition last week when I did this. Okay. So let me do that again. Report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, and report progress on the Ministry of Health, and ask leave to sit again.
Member, as a vote is about to take place, and those participating remotely should prepare their voting cards. The question is that the committee rise, report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, and report progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Health, and seek leave to sit again. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Motion is carried. Thank you, members. This committee now stands adjourned.